You are listening to Season 2 of Transition Tales, hosted by Christina Herr. Listen to stories from the military community that inspire you to visualize your future and feel empowered to move through your own transitions in life. Welcome back to Transition Tales, a Live with Courage production. I have a guest with me that I'm very excited about. I've been waiting to get him on my podcast, so I'm very happy to have Dan Horgan with me. Can you tell us a little bit about who you are?
I can. Sorry, I was taking a sip of my coffee.
That's okay.
So,
Coffee, man.
Right? So I am Dan Horgan. I am retired Air Force. I did about 24 years in the Air Force, but about 12 active duty, and the other 12 or 10 there or so were guard and reserve time. I started out in DC, went to Minot, North Dakota, flew on AWACS for some years, and then I had my coolest job where I was a TACP. I was a JTAC, so calling in airstrikes. But during that time too, I was a police officer in Baltimore, Maryland. Yeah, so I've had quite an extensive career there. So I did about 7 years in Baltimore as a patrol cop, and then did SWAT and did narcotics. Grew up in Maryland and then moved back to Oklahoma with my wife. And then about 2 years ago, we came down to San Antonio. Bethany is still my wife is still in the Air Force. She's guard, but she's on a tour down here, active duty. So that brought us down here. And I was like, man, I'll get on with like Yeti, Black Rifle, or Grunt Style or somebody. And then it didn't happen. And so I was doing the LinkedIn Mill City events, and that's where, we had met, but then, a LinkedIn success story of mine happened. And so it's been almost about 2 years now being with Black Rifle. So sitting here in San Antonio office with Black Rifle.
Absolutely. What was your transition like? What do you consider your military transition? Because it sounds like you made quite a few of them.
I did, and talking through different, like even LinkedIn kind of scenarios with people, like I cheated. So, well, not that I cheated, but a lot of guys do it. Like when I knew I was retiring, even from the guard, it's like, what do you do? Right. And you're caught in this moment, especially, when you do 20 years, even more than longer than 20 years, like you're institutionalized. And it's so easy to fall back just on your military skill set. So I actually did about 1.5 years in Afghanistan as a contractor. I was a site lead, in control of and flying the King Airs, the ISR platforms. So I did 60 days in Afghanistan and 60 days home. I did that for about 1.5 years or so. And I was like, okay, family, this is kind of crappy. But then even from there, I just did that exact same job, but did it in the States for another aviation company. And I think that really is a little bit of where my transition happened, because while I was doing that for that aviation company in Oklahoma City, they were like, hey man, we need someone to be like a first sergeant, like a sergeant major for the company. And they were like, Dan. And so I actually worked for the CEO of the aviation company in Oklahoma City. And that's where like I learned, like I went to board meetings, I learned what EBITDA was, and just, started getting into stuff that is true, civilian, side of it. But then again, my wife, got orders to come down here. And we're like, I'm down here. But then even once I got down here, I was like, not that I was like a typical veteran, because I don't want to say we're typical, but I think I had an ego to the point where I was like, again, like Yeti or Grunt Style or Black Rifle, they'll pick me up for sure, right? Like, I got this. We talk about, they're going to be beating down my door. I'm going to be, rejecting job offers left and right. And it was like, crickets. So again, I fell back on my military training. I ended up doing some contract work from home, which was great, money and everything, but this was pre-COVID. I was definitely working from home, and I was doing computer simulation stuff with my JTAC experience, kind of being like a military SME. But then that's where the Black Rifle job came open. And again, I think that's where, again, kind of the transition now has, because while Black Rifles, we're about 50% veterans, here for the company. So you get about 400 employees over 3 locations. 50% is well over an industry standard for, a veteran hire rate, so that's great. And that's good for the environment, but like it is a company and we are a business. And so now I think this is a true transition, especially now that I'm in the marketing world where I don't have a classic marketing degree. I know the brand and I know the product and things like that. And again, the community. So right now, I guess I'm back into a true like transition phase, I feel like.
Yeah. And you
Yeah.
mentioned that you don't have like a true marketing degree. And I think that is something that kind of sets some of these veteran-owned businesses apart, is that they hire, whether you have degrees or not, if you can show them that you have the experience. And sometimes when you get your foot in the door, they see something in you and they don't say, oh, well, they don't have a marketing degree. No, they're going to be like, wow, Dan would be really great at this. So I think that is awesome. Because
Well,
I
it goes
think,
to like an adaptability. And that's the thing with the military, I think is tough is, I had like 4 AFSCs, MOSs, through my career. Well, I learned these all drastically jobs and succeeded at them. But I think most of the people in the military are like that. You stay in long enough, you rarely have just one job you ever did. And so, but how do you put in a resume and cover letter that like I learned 4 different jobs? Like, you have to be able to express that adaptability, the ability to learn and then learn quickly, right?
to somebody that's never served, I think that's the
Exactly. Yeah.
challenge. I think that's one of the perks about working for a veteran run company, is that they understand our abilities.
It is. And it's also just trying to be that fit. Like I know people talk about a cultural fit and things and, I can, having someone who can learn quickly, but being able to integrate well into the team is key. But those things are tough, and you take risks. Companies take risks. I mean, they definitely took a risk, on me. Just you've seen my office. The office I'm in actually is Evan and Matt and JT's office. But they had jokes. 6 months into it, they're like, "Oh man, I thought you'd be gone after 3 months," just because like think, and not for anything I was doing wrong, but sometimes people just might like, wow, I don't this is not for me.
So they're essentially telling you that they took a risk on you.
They did. No, 100%. Like, so hindsight being 2020, Shane is our director of retail, and he's the one who Evan tasked to hire for the initial position, like I said, almost 2 years ago. Yeah. And Shane, like he took a risk, and that was one of his successes that he knew. He's like, thank God, like it did work out.
I know me and you both wanted that job. I remember that's how we met.
There were a few people.
I'm like, where did the job go? And you're like, I got it.
And I tell you guys, like, I know I landed the job, but like, I always explain. So for people that are listening, the role that I had is I always said, if you're a Game of Thrones fan, like that was my role. I was the hand.
Right.
The people, I wasn't a true just executive assistant, and I wasn't true just a project manager. It was a combination of both. And I still do some of those things, but like I said, now I'm getting into the marketing side of it. So I'm hiring my successor, out in Salt Lake for Evan. But I mean, it's an eye-opening to be able to attend a board meeting. And I said, I did it for that aviation company too. You attend a board meeting and you see what a strategy is for the company that other employees don't get to see. And then what finances look like, and you get to see the whole litany of what finances, and operations, you get to see all that. Like, it's big eye-openers that most people in a company, like think of Amazon, we're not Amazon size, but like there's people who don't know
What happens.
Yeah, exactly. And so to be able to be in that world, I'm super humble and grateful for it, but it was definitely a true learning experience, and
Oh,
I learned from it for sure.
absolutely.
Yeah.
You talked about the dynamics of your position that you first got hired into, and a lot of people wanted it, but I honestly think that you were the perfect fit for it. I think they did a really good job hiring you. We've had a lot of conversations since that first meeting, and the work that you do for them and the attitude that you have while you do it is just absolutely amazing. And I think that's exactly what they needed.
Yeah. Thanks. It was like the LinkedIn, like they make jokes around here, like I'm the LinkedIn influencer, just because our social media team doesn't really get too involved with it, but it is like, we went to all these LinkedIn Mill City events, and you have to be authentic with it, right? I mean, Evan will preach to me the same way. It's like all our partners, you have to be authentic with it. And because if it's not, then you can see through it, right? It doesn't feel it. And like your compliment to me, exactly. It is authentic. I mean, I loved it, you know, again, being able to take the time out to do the podcast with you, you know, like I said, we had to reschedule it before just because things were crazy. And today's a typical Monday here at Black Rifle, so it's crazy. But again, I wanted to do it, with you. So yeah.
Right. No, you are one of my favorite people that I've met here in San Antonio, and you're one of my biggest supporters. So I really appreciate that also. And you mentioned authenticity. I know we're talking about the company a lot, but I think it's kind of a good platform to do it real quick during this conversation. But that is one of my favorite things also about Black Rifle is you guys are authentic. All of you are. And you're right. I think it shows through, and you're reaching an audience that probably felt a little left out for a while. So I think that's great. Getting back to your transition, what do you think your biggest challenge was when you were going through your multiple military transitions?
My resume, I tell you, and even today, if I were to update it, and I need to, because you always should have one updated, but I think my resume, like that was a huge challenge because again, like we talked about, being able to describe what you've done, especially when it's over 20 some years. I mean, if it's only over 10 years, you do so much in the military. But again, I go back because my police time, like 7 years in Baltimore, is a crazy amount of time. I mean, it's like a number 2 in homicide, city. Like I did so much in Baltimore, and people don't even give law enforcement that much credit, like how do you quantify what you do? And you're like, well, man, I'm a psychologist to a social worker to a marksman, right? And you're doing all these things. So to put that on paper in a great resume format, I think was a huge challenge. Like I think I paid like $200 and I did a resume, which I would advise do not pay for a resume service. I'm sorry for those people that are in resume services. I paid about $200 for one, and I can tell you, I really wasn't that happy with it, and it didn't.
Well, they're probably used to doing civilian-based resumes, and when you have military service and you're trying to communicate to a civilian employer, especially if you're trying to go from being like a combat guy to an office guy, like how do you tell them that your combat experience, what was relevant in that you can utilize for that company? That's really hard to translate. And even some of the free resume services that veterans have, I think they have a hard time translating that stuff too.
Well, sure. It's just like, like being a JTAC, meaning like, okay, I literally controlled aircraft and dropped bombs close to friendlies. And you can tell these crazy war stories, like the responsibility level you have. And you're like, okay, well, tell me how that's going to get my marketing calendar strategy set for the year. And sometimes it can't. And so, that's where the veteran has to realize like, all right, like I was in charge of, some multi-million-dollar stuff, but you know what? It doesn't apply. So like, what skill set does that, and that's, I've told a few people, they asked for like, my advice, and I just like, maybe try to communicate the communication side of it. Right. I mean,
Right.
you were a skilled communicator, right? So don't worry about that you dropped bombs and did all this crazy cool stuff. Like we talked about, like what communication is, integration, right? A JTAC has to integrate. So you talk about being able to integrate between agencies like an Army and Air Force. Well, equate that to be like, well, I would work well with IT and do, things like that. I think there's always an angle that you can do it, but it's the thing. A resume though are words on paper, and I work with our recruiters, Nicole and Jared, often here at the company, and they go through hundreds of resumes, and they don't have time to see what that paper story tells you. So that's where that's what I'm saying. That's where I know it was difficult to me, and I think it still is how does someone get through that level, because you got to be able to break through. You got to give me that chance, and then in an interview, I can verbally tell you and have this story and give you the wow factor to where when the interview's done, right, they're like, okay, I'm hiring that dude tomorrow.
And I know that you said that didn't you call them or email Black Rifle?
Yeah. So I call my LinkedIn success story was, well, it was a LinkedIn message. So I was connected with our COO on LinkedIn, but didn't know Scott, at the time, just connected with him. And the job ad, yeah, read like for a transitioning O3. There used to be a general's aide, and I was like, whatever. So like I emailed him like, well, hey, what about a combat E7, who's done the job for CEO of an aviation company. And I guess, again, timing, yeah, right. I know you're laughing. It is funny. But Scott somehow bit, and I got the interview. And then after the interview, though, again, did my homework. Like I called and I asked Shane even, I was like, hey, like I know the company, like what do you guys want me to wear?
Right.
Right. Because people will show up in a suit here, and if I see him out in the lobby in a suit, I'm like, right, it's not a suit atmosphere, but I don't want you to show up in Daisy Duke shorts, and a crop top either. I think I wore like a 511 polo and like a pair of jeans, some nice shoes, which is, again, it's like it's a casual Friday feel. But that was just the level, though. But some people like won't have the gumption even to ask.
Right.
And then talking to Shane afterwards, Shane was like, oh, I'm glad you asked. Like, I
Right.
don't want to be like, even dressed in this, if someone's just wearing a short sleeve collar polo shirt, again, it's one up from a t-shirt. But if you're in a full suit and tie, and now I'm wearing this to interview you,
Yeah,
yeah,
you
it's
might feel a little weird too, huh?
yeah.
Some of
And
those
that's,
guys I don't think would care, but
but I've been there though, like I said. But again, I love the old adage: dress for the position you want, not the one you have.
right.
Right. And I know that's cliche, but I mean, it is true to a point. But again, I think when you're trying to go in for the fit, um, there's nothing to say that you can't ask. I mean, because I don't think it dinged me, but I wouldn't, if someone had called or asked me to what they would wear to an interview here, like I wouldn't hold that against them, being like, ugh, God, they asked me that. They don't know anything. I've been like, okay, great. They're putting the effort, the thought in to know, hey, I need to ask. Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
and that also gives you an opportunity to get somebody on the phone. And
Sure.
I
Right.
think a lot of us don't do that. So you took chances. Like I take chances all the time. Like
Yeah.
I told you that I messaged somebody in the company just to tell them I thought they were awesome on the podcast. They may not read it, they may not respond, but what are they going to do? Take your birthday away?
No, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, it's all good.
Yeah. So taking those chances, I think, is really
Yep.
important. Um, if you had any advice to give somebody that's about to transition, already in the middle of their transition, getting frustrated with their transition, what advice would you give?
Man, that's a tough one. Well, not that it's a tough one. So again, I am involved with like LinkedIn and like Michael Quinn. Like, there's really big time people. When I say big time people, I mean people with a lot of the breadth of experience on LinkedIn. And the stuff that I learn when I read articles every day on LinkedIn. But so my advice, now that I'm kind of processing through, I think networking, right? Networking is really the key to it, because if I have a resume that's so, but if I can get that connection with someone in the company and network with them, and they have my resume there, but they've already met me, then maybe they'll overlook, if my resume is like, oh, I don't know, but they're like, man, I met this person, I know him. And then being to a bunch of the, events, the networking events that we've had here in San Antonio, like, I think it is well worth it. Kind of another success story, I think I was maybe telling you the other day, is Elite Meat is a company that does transition for like soft operator stuff. And one of the guys, Preston, that now works for us, kind of came through that. But Preston networked with me because Zach Hughes, who's the COO of Elite Meat, they have chapters. And so again, I think Preston's a success story to be like, hey man, like networking can work, because he had applied for jobs with us, but nothing was going on. But I knew, I'm going to point because Logan Stark, our editor-in-chief, his desk is next to mine. Logan was looking for somebody, and I was like, hey, like, this guy Preston, and then it clicked, and then he ended up interviewing, and then Logan hired him. So I think and those are tough though. I mean, because networking too is like anything. Like, people reach out, well, hey, I've networked with you, but hey, what is there for me? And you're like, it's timing, right? Timing, it's got to be, and it's sad to say, but like sometimes getting a job, especially if it's a company that is really on your radar, the stars and moons have to align.
Yep.
Right. I mean, it's timing, the opportunity, and all of that, and some things I think I read it today, or I was reading about it, but it's just like, what's an internal, actually I think it was a guy, Matt Quick. I think Matt's on LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm.
He got passed over in a USA Jobs one, and it was an internal hire that they hired. And you're like, yeah, man, like you don't know who your competition is. And, you're like, oh, I'm number one, number two, I got this, but you might be number one, number two on the external list,
Right.
right? There could be a number one, number two on the internal list, and you're not going to know anything about that, So networking and getting in there and having a great resume and everything, you're like, I got this. And then you get the thing that says, sorry, you're not selected for the position. And you're like, but those are tough too, just to know that there's internal hires that are coming around. So like I tell you, like trying to find my successor, for Evan, we did an internal posting, right? Because we haven't blasted out external just to see who would be internal. So we actually did an internal posting for it, and got some good things. And so it'll probably go that route instead of doing an internal one and an external one. And now I'm just going to get, flooded with a bunch of external ones. But if I already know that there's a few people internally who can fill that, so, but I knew that factor too. So talking to HR, I said, hey, let's just do an internal one for now and to see where we're at.
Well, and that saves a lot of hassle for the recruiters, and it saves a lot of heartache for people that are applying. So I actually respect that.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I think so. Networking, that'd be my advice, is to really try to make that connection, again, an authentic connection with somebody. And then just see what's there. You build that relationship. And I know that's tough though. I mean, if you don't have a job and you're looking for a job and you're networking, like you're I don't know what's the word I'm looking for. Like your anxiety, like you're going to want to push it, but like a week or 2 weeks isn't a lot of time. We might not have something in the company, and just, it can't be the, oh, I'm your friend, so if there's ever something, well, it's great. Okay, if there is ever something, but like, again, like maybe there isn't something, and just, and if there's not, our friendship isn't based upon me getting you a job.
It's not the military anymore.
Right. It's not like, oh, you're not my friend because you didn't give me that job. You're like, well, I never had a job open for it, dude. Like, what are you talking about? Yeah.
Right.
So, and I haven't experienced that really much. I mean, there's been a onesie twosies where I've gotten like a DM about, hey, if there's anything ever here, and you're like, okay, like I'll keep that in the back of my mind, and I will, and I would, and you have to, because, it's kind of the golden rule, like treat how you want to be treated. And, and if I'm doing that, then I'm really hoping that others are doing that too. And because you never know when you could find yourself in that role, right? Nothing is ever guaranteed, right?
Right.
So yeah, you don't
want to burn no bridges.
Yeah, to be back on the market, right? I mean, the job market's tough. I mean, companies are hiring, yes, but companies are firing too. And yeah, it's like real estate, right?
It's definitely a hirer's market.
Seller's market. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So what is your suggestion for those that, we can't really face-to-face network anymore, and that takes the human out of it. So how do you think somebody could go about networking now?
I don't know. Like when you were asking that, sometimes my brain, like I try to go ahead of you. My wife hates that. We're doing a lot of the virtual events, and I like the virtual events, but if it's not this, where it's just one-on-one, like your conversation, this is you and I just talking, right?
Right.
A lot of the virtual events, it could be 300-400 people. And you don't get that, now it's maybe that's just I can type in a chat or something. Maybe you can get 25 questions, but if it's a group really of like 300 people and you're only answering 25 questions, you're probably missing a crap ton. So I don't know. Like, I think it's either you go outside the box and I've actually, and I apologize, Grace. I think Grace, it is Grace. So if she watches this, she's in marketing for another company, and I did like a 10-minute phone call with her, and I didn't know Grace, and but she wanted to introduce herself and then hear about like how we were talking, and we talked for like about 10 minutes or so, and and I've seen her still on LinkedIn, and that was great, and I will, like, I don't know her from Adam, but like that 10-minute phone call, like I was able to take with her, and it was it was a good conversation. But if we ever had anything that I thought, you know, she could fill, or if she even needed, or if she reached back out, like I would, like, yeah, great, you know, thumbs up. She would get me, because a lot of people, you know, sometimes putting your name on an approval, right, to recommend someone can be tough. A lot of people don't want to. A lot of people don't want to be like, man, I don't want to like, I'm not going to give that recommendation. I'm really hoping, like with COVID, just, I mean, like even our store, right? We can have like 60 people in there. We're at 75% capacity. You know, like with our office here, like we have big enough conference rooms. I think, you know, kind of go back into our original question. I think you start having like some in-person ones, but you're just gonna have to dial it way back. Like if the normal group's like 200, I mean, maybe you only do like 20, you know, somehow like that, because I still think that, you know.
Yeah, you can do the first 20 people to register gets to go, you know, type of thing.
Something, you know, I think because you're not going to be able to beat that in person, you know. I was never an online class taker. Like I was always like go in class, hear my teacher. You know, that's the way I learned. So to see everything now being online, like when my kids were out of school when COVID first hit, I was like, oh my God. But now they're back in school and you're like, great, you know. Because again, I think their learning is a lot better from in person to just
Oh yeah,
everything.
definitely.
So pros and cons for both, but I like, for the networking stuff, I think you have to do it in person. You know?
I totally agree, and
Yeah.
hopefully we'll get back to that soon.
Yeah.
Do you have any final words for our audience for Transition Tales?
I think my, you know, final thoughts are, again, like we were just driving home. Network, you know, try to plug away at your resume, you know, but don't get discouraged. Like I know, again, I mean, I was a job hunter for the longest time too, especially right when I came here to San Antonio, because it's just, again, those stars and moons will align, right? It's just going to take time. Like what I posted today on LinkedIn, and I'm rolling my eyes just because I'm not that I'm making fun of my own content, but you know, I kind of sometimes feel cheesy, but I was like, I did some archery hunting or
Yeah,
shooting.
you got some good clickbait on there.
I was doing some archery shooting, and I was just, but I just like, you know, like you have to take time, you know, if you scout your stuff out, then you aim what you're doing and you execute on it. And those sound like very, you know, just like 3 easy steps, but sometimes people will forget that. They might not scout stuff out. They might just take aim and then try to shoot it. And you're like, you need to scout it out. Your cat, like, meow, your cat just arched. Anyway, you know, but you have to sometimes remind people, like, man, there's a step process to trying to land this. And you know, again, if I were to equate it to, you know, me shooting some archery yesterday, I mean, I lost 8 arrows, right, over like 25 targets. So when you, and I know like the analogies might seem cheesy, but like you're not going to nail every target dead center every time, right? You're gonna have to take those shots and do it.
And you
And
have
then
to
people,
aim.
right?
You
And,
can't just apply for every job. You got to aim.
yeah, well, you know, I mean, I have a laser rangefinder, and you have to range it, right? And then you dial in, you know, so for both, like, you know, you dial it in, and you're going back, and everything has to be right, right? The wind, you might get a 15, 20 mile gust wind that blows it off. So again, searching for a job can be the same aspect. Like you're like, oh, my resume is awesome. I've networked, you know, I know the person, you know, but then one little breeze blows your arrow off, and, you know, but anyway. But people need to hear that sometimes, because they might skip a step, and they're like, oh, that's great. Yeah, I forgot about that step. Yeah, let me do that. So patience, you know, has a lot to do with it. Like you talked about resiliency, right? You have to be resilient in a job search,
Oh, yes,
because if not,
absolutely.
right, if you're not like 5 rejections into it, man, you're gonna be no good.
Yeah, I talk a lot about that. Rejection is one of the hardest things. And honestly, rejection makes you stupid. The more you get rejected, your IQ keeps dipping,
Sure, right.
and you can't think, and you can't handle emotion. So that's why that focusing, only apply for the jobs that you know you want, and only apply for the jobs that you know you can get.
Sure, right.
You know, so I think that's so important. You said a lot of great things, and I know you're laser focused on your work at Black Rifle Coffee. I really appreciate the time that you've taken out to be on this podcast with me. I appreciate the brand, but more importantly, I appreciate you and who you are as a person.
Thanks. Yep. Awesome.
So I hope you have a good rest of your day. And
I will. Glancing over at my calendar.
so, yeah, I appreciate your time. I hope you have a
Yeah.
good rest of your day and a good rest of your week. Your work week's just starting. So, all right.
Awesome.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yep.